Rice or no rice? By a show of hands, are you a family that eats rice or doesn't eat rice on Pesach? So rice and no rice? Okay. Several years ago, this question was posed by Rabbi David Galinkin, who's one of the conservative movement's major poskim or halachic decisors. Just as a reminder, kitniot are like rice or beans, legumes that in Ashkenazi tradition are not eaten on Pesach. Now, the first reference to this prohibition is not until 13th century in France. Galinkin traces this prohibition from what some medieval rabbis considered to be a minhag shtut, a foolish custom, to becoming very mainstream in the Ashkenazi community. In the end, Rabbi Galinkin finds ample evidence to permit eating kitniot on Pesach. But before you go and stock up with hummus for their Seder, remember that even if you're eating kitniot, they should be kosher lePesach. Now that's easy to do if you're shaking your head. You can't find any here. It's hard to find here. That's why you got to go to Israel, Jerry. It's easy to do. If you're eating rice and beans, you take the raw rice, the raw beans, you inspect them before you cook them, make sure there's no chametz in them, and then fine, you make them. But if you're trying to have something like hummus, or let's say peanut butter, then you have to make sure that the ingredients used in the peanut butter don't contain chametz, that there's no additives. And so your typical Jiffy or Skip is not going to be kosher lePesach. The only way really to be sure is if there's a label that says kosher lePesach le'ochle kitniot, that this is kosher for Passover for those who eat kitniot. And as some of you have said, it's kind of harder to find these products in the United States. Very easy in Israel to find them. So again, by show of hands, how many of you are of Ashkenazi origin? And how many of Sephardi or Mizrahi origin? So again, just so we're all on the same page, Sephardi Jews are those Jews who trace their roots to Spain or Turkey or the Balkans. Mizrahi Jews from North Africa and from the Middle East. About 10% of American Jewish adults consider themselves Sephardi or Mizrahi, and so it's no surprise that America tends to follow Ashkenazi practice, and that's true of us here at Bethel. Although we don't serve rice at our second Seder, there is still room at the second Seder, we have, however, adopted some Sephardi practices. We tend to say Shabbat Shalom instead of or in addition to Good Shabbos. We read the Sephardi Haftarah because it's shorter. At my Seder, we have Sephardi date charoset in addition to the Ashkenazi apple charoset. This morning, I want to invite us to consider adopting not a Sephardi ritual or recipe, but a Sephardi Mizrahi hashkafa, world view. So let me explain. Michal Biton is the spiritual director of what's called the Downtown Minyan in New York City. She's a scholar at NYU, where she directs the National Study of Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews in the United States. And she is a public intellectual who gained prominence speaking out in the aftermath of October 7th. Born in Argentina, Biton traces her roots to Morocco and Spain and Spanish and Syria. Some of you might remember her as a featured speaker brought in to the Twin Cities by the JCRC, I don't know, it was last year or the year before. So recently, Biton wrote an essay called "The Future is Sephardic." It is timely and provocative. Timely because she is addressing the emerging challenges we are facing as American Jews. Provocative, intentionally so, because it implies an underlying critique of our liberal Ashkenazi Jewish community. Now, admittedly, in this essay, Biton offers an exaggerated binary. Still, it is a helpful thought exercise because it invites us to look at ourselves in the mirror and consider how can we as Jews navigate the changing American landscape. So I want to share with you generously from this essay, but first provide a bit of background. Well, the first Jewish immigrants to the U.S. were Sephardi by way of Amsterdam. Ashkenazi Jews, as you know, eventually have come to far outnumber Sephardi Jews. Some Ashkenazi Jews came in the early part of the 1800s from Germany, but the population really grew exponentially at the end of the 1800s and early 1900s, really through the 1930s, with waves of immigrants from Eastern Europe, probably many of your families. Now let's recall that Europe's Enlightenment had opened new opportunities for Jews to participate in civic life. But in practice, that really only went so far. Think, for example, of the Dreyfus Affair and the residual anti-Semitism of the so-called enlightened Europeans. America, Jews believed, America would be different. It would be a Golden Medina, a land of economic opportunity, but also a melting pot, a home where Jews could achieve social acceptance and integration. For liberal Ashkenazi Jews, that dream has largely been realized. Now, that dream and that history stand in contrast for the story of Sephardi Jews. Many of America's Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews arrived after 1948 as Arab nationalism grew. These Jews had lived for centuries as dhimmis, as tolerated second-class citizens. They never experienced emancipation. They didn't live under the same kind of enlightenment. And so this influenced their experience of and vision for America. As Beton writes, for Sephardi Jews, their primary concern wasn't freedom or social acceptance, it was stability and continuity. This impulse towards preservation rather than transformation became the foundation of their life in America, leading to their own vision of the American dream. Now, to be clear, we have benefited tremendously from America's welcome, from the opportunity to fully participate in civic life. Integration has been a blessing for us as Jews, and it has been good for Judaism. No one here, of course, wants to live as second-class citizens. But Beton argues that for Jews in America, the ground is shifting. There was a time when Ashkenazi Jews, they shed their particular religious practices. They took off their kippahs, they took off their talis, they discarded kashrut, and they even moved Shabbat to Sundays. Doing so, they thought, would help them fit in. Today, by contrast, she says, we can maintain our religious practices and we can still fit in. But to do so, we do have to give up something. We have to give up our global Jewish family, because increasingly in America, Zionists are not welcome. In this new America, therefore, Judaism is reduced to just a religion. Religion, that's okay, but not Judaism as a nation. In light of this shift, Beton argues that American Jews need a fundamental realignment. And she wants a change, and she's not talking about kitniot. If the past century was Ashkenazi, she argues, the next century must be Sephardi. That means moving from a focus on integration to one of preservation. Okay, so what does all of this mean, tachlis, to use a good Ashkenazi expression? Beton offers 4 suggestions of what she calls cultural appropriation through selective adaptation. Number 1, she says, we should grow thick skin. As Jews, we don't need to be cool to be liked. Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews, they were never tied to the elite for validation. Their confidence came from within, from family, from community, from economic stability, from ancestral memory. For Sephardi Jews, therefore, the rise of today's anti-Semitism, it's painful and it's worrisome, but it is not identity threatening. It doesn't challenge their sense of self-worth. American Jews should grow thick skin and look internally rather than depend on external endorsement. Number two, Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews offer American Jews a different spiritual path, one that is less self-conscious and more rooted in embodied reverence. In our progressive Ashkenazi circles, spiritual sophistication means sometimes distancing yourself from God or rejecting God entirely. For Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews, on the other hand, there is no shame in displaying reverence. Developing a relationship with God and Jewish practice, therefore, is less fraught. As Beton writes, "Whenever I struggled with God and spirituality, I have a simple tool to stabilize me. I always have faith in my grandmother's God, in my abuelita's God. This is a family-oriented faith. We approach God as a parent, and we approach God through our parents. A change to this orientation would give American Jews even greater access to draw strength from our spiritual core." Number three, adopt communal boundaries that reflect our deep family ties. Whereas Ashkenazi Jews tend to focus on, or some would say obsess over observance levels, over ideology. Oh, you wear this kind of kippah, you must be this kind of Jew. Historically, Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews have shown greater flexibility in practice and in theology. Where they are uncompromising is around family ties. Sephardi Jews might disagree with one another on religious or political matters, but when it comes to threats against our people, that's a line that can't be crossed. For example, you could be that cousin who never shows up. You could be that cousin who argues at Shabbat dinner. You could be that cousin who everyone knows is using their cell phone to text under the Shabbat table. But you can't be one who sides with those who want to hurt our family or our people. Not everyone has to be equally observant, but everyone has to accept that they're in a family bound by mutual responsibility and a shared fate. Finally, the fourth recommended cultural appropriation. By now you might have noticed that all of Beton's examples of these appropriations, they have one thing in common: the centrality of family. For liberal Ashkenazi Jews, she says, upward mobility historically meant raising children who would move out and move away to pursue opportunities wherever those opportunities took them. For Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews, on the other hand, the gravitational pull of families kept children close by, in the same neighborhood, in the same family business. That means multiple generations living within blocks of one another. That means synagogues populated by extended families. That means community as family. And here's why that matters. For Sephardi Jews, family is the primary transmitter of Jewish identity and Jewish education. The work to ensure Jewish continuity can't be outsourced to schools and shuls and camps and the JCC. The task does not begin with knowledge experts or professional programmers. It happens through parents and grandparents who understands that it is their responsibility to transmit meaning and obligation and memory. Now, this comes directly from the Torah, and there's no clearer example than the Seder. When your child asks, what is the meaning of these laws and these statutes that we are commanded to follow? And you say to your child, V'yigadata lebincha, tell your children. The Seder is informal, intergenerational Jewish education at its best. On Seder night, our table becomes our classroom. Our home becomes our Beit Midrash. parents as teachers are a link in a generational chain. But the goal is not just to teach content, it is to create memory, to form identity, to instill belonging. More than informational, Vigarata lebincha is relational. Grow thick skin, unabashedly embrace Jewish spiritual practice with enthusiasm, be protective of and bound by responsibility to family, and for family as the transmitters of Jewish identity. Now, I find that there are ways in which Baton's approach romanticizes Sephardic culture while glossing over certain negative aspects of these qualities. At the same time, there are blessings in our Ashkenazi hashkafa. It's a worldview that embraces pluralism, that wrestles with critical thought, that cares for the stranger, that sees value in integration beyond self-affirmation. Still, there is something to this Sephardi future that Baton describes. For if we adopt these postures, we become rooted in a way that can't be canceled. If campus students jeer, if colleagues pressure us to distance ourselves from Israel, if invitations dry up, it hurts. But we remain strong because we have family, because we have tradition, because we have community, because we have civilization that has survived far worse. There's one more element of Sephardi culture I want to suggest that we might adopt. And here again, I'm not speaking about kitniot, rather an optimistic outlook. Rabbi Mark Angel, Rabbi Emeritus of New York's Spanish-Portuguese Synagogue, writes, Judaism is not austere for Sephardim. In spite of the many adversities we have suffered in our history, we have maintained our self-respect, our positive view of life. Sephardim love to celebrate, to enjoy life. This is an attitude we should hold on to over Pesach and for years to come. Shabbat Shalom.